Hey y'all, it's Heel Heat time.
Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles and this is going to be an episode of It Came From the Network. Now on this episode, we're going to talk about the weird, wacky, wild, and sometimes campy, sometimes just downright bad stuff you can find on the WWE Network. The topic of this one, I randomly picked WCW Saturday Night because they've been added to the network recently. This is WCW Saturday Night from October 3rd of 1992. Let's jump right into it. First really interesting thing of the show, Jim Ross and Arn Anderson are the commentary team, which was really cool actually. I don't remember Arn ever doing this, so he must not have done it much, but he did well. I enjoy the two together. Of course, it's Jim Ross, so how can you not enjoy Jim Ross? But I thought they worked well together. I wish we would have seen maybe more of Arn doing this. Leading us into our first match of the night, a freshly heel-turned Brian Pillman versus Brad Armstrong. I really enjoyed this match. I thought it was a really good match. Two of the best wrestlers of the early 90s. Two of the guys that were synonymous with the light heavyweight division in WCW at the time. I thought it was really good. Pillman picked up the win. I'm going to give this match a 4 out of 5, 5 being the best and 1 being the worst. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a hot opener. And it was definitely something worth watching again. Now coming from that, we go into an interview with the living legend Bruno Sammartino, hyping Halloween Havoc for a couple weeks from the time of the airing, which would be in his hometown of Pittsburgh, which is why it ties to him. It always struck me as weird seeing Bruno Sammartino when he would show up on WCW TV because he was on the outs with WWE or WWF at the time. But they tried to use him and milk him for what all he was worth. Unfortunately, Bruno was never really a great interview guy. I'd give this one a 2 out of 5. It was good, wasn't great. Next up, we have a match of 4 future stars. Vinny Vegas, who would go on to be Kevin Nash and Diamond Dallas Page, the Vegas Connection, versus Buff Bagwell and Shane Douglas. Or, actually, it was Marcus Bagwell at this time and Shane Douglas. See, I thought about him as Buff. It was a good match. I was surprised at how athletic Kevin Nash was, Vinny Vegas, in this match, but then I remembered this was before most of his knee injuries. DDP was really clunky at times, but again, this was towards the beginning of his career. Buff Bagwell, you could tell he had something, but he wasn't there yet. Shane Douglas was the most polished of the 4, and he was still very young. I mean, this was not too long after Dynamic Dude Shane Douglas, so you still had a guy that was young, but he was the best of the 4. I dug this match for what it was. It was a highlight of 4 guys that would go on to be better. I'm going to give it a 3 out of 4 stars. Douglas and Bagwell pick up the win. Like I said, I liked it mostly for what they would all become later in life. But again, it's cool to see where they came from kind of things. You got 3 guys, DDP and Nash. Nash being a WWF and WCW champion, DDP being a WCW world champion, Shane Douglas, an ECW world champion, and Buff Bagwell, who had a very successful career. No matter how many jokes we make about him, he was actually very successful, so really cool to see a match like this. Next up, we had kind of what you would expect from a show of this time, and it was Heavy Metal Van Hammer versus Mike Freeman. And now, if you're not familiar with Mike Freeman, don't fret. It's not a forgotten superstar. This was a time when squash matches were still something that was acceptable to be shown on television. Van Hammer wins in a quick match. I give this one a 1 out of 5. Watching this now, it's hard to watch squash matches. It's even harder when the guy that you're putting over, Van Hammer, doesn't really know what he's doing. I mean, it wasn't nothing interesting about this. It was a boring match. It was a boring couple minutes. Luckily, it was quick. That's the only thing that I could say about it that's good. After that, we go into a replay from a match from the week before. Jake the Snake and the Barbarian versus Ron Simmons and Barry Windham. A very solid tag team match. It gets interrupted by Cactus Jack, who was running with the Barbarian at the time. They were kind of a quasi-tag team. Kind of Jack was his manager, sort of. It was a weird dichotomy. He comes down and interferes, and Dustin Rhodes comes out and interferes. And again, we get a little bit of what I said before with DDP and Vinny Vegas. Got Cactus Jack and Dustin Rhodes before they would go on to be stars. Ron Simmons was at probably the height of his popularity. This was during his world title run. So, I mean, you got to see some really cool intersections here. Guys that go on to do different things. I gave it a 3 out of 5. The match got thrown out, a double disqualification. I thought it was fun. I liked that they recapped it. If I watched I kind of gave it a little bit less than what I would have. At the time, if this was fresh, I would have probably gave it a 4. However, since it was a recap of the week before, I took that into account, and I would have said if I watched this 2 weeks in a row, I would not have been happy. So hence why I gave it a 3 instead of 4. Took a little bit off of it, just because it was a replay of a match the week before and not a fresh match. Next up, we have Ron Simmons versus Kendall. Another squash match. This one, Ron picks up the win, of course. He's the world champion. He's not going to lose it to Kendall. I gave it a 2 out of 5. I like this one a little bit better than the match with Van Hammer just because of Ron Simmons. Ron Simmons is so magnetic that even in a squash match, you can find something interesting about him, and I really did. I love watching Ron Simmons, especially this era. I think he's one of the most underrated wrestlers of all time. He doesn't quite get the due he deserves. I mean, he's been in the WWE Hall of Fame. He's looked upon fondly. But he's not really spoken of on how good he actually was. He can move around. He had power moves. He was a great talker, one of the great talkers of the time. I like Ron Simmons a lot, as you can see. The more we do of this era, the more WCW Ron Simmons, even Acolytes Ron Simmons, or Nation Domination Ron Simmons, Farouk, the more you'll hear me talk positive about Ron Simmons, because how much I actually enjoyed his work. Next up, we had a couple interviews. First off, Shane Douglas did an interview, kind of insinuating that he was a new wrestler, but I think he was just a little more than a year removed from his Dynamic Dudes run, so it was kind of a weird interview. I kind of want to say it was a little bit bad, to be honest with you. For a guy that would go on to be one of the best talkers of the decade, he really didn't give a great interview here. I'm going to give this one a 2 out of 5. You didn't really see the Shane Douglas we would get to know as the franchise Shane Douglas later on. There wasn't even really a glimpse of it. He just was mediocre, which you never want to say about a guy like Shane Douglas. Next up, we had Jake the Snake Roberts. He did an interview. Now, this one also fell flat. But, again, like I said with Ron Simmons, his charisma carried a little bit higher. I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. Watching it back and knowing what I know now, it seemed like Jake wasn't there for the promo. It seemed like maybe this was during one of his drug binges. It wasn't as great as some of the great Jake the Snake Roberts promos. It wasn't the worst promo ever. But again, when you hear Jake the Snake Roberts, you expect more. You expect more from a guy like Shane Douglas. So, 2 kind of lackluster promos back to back, in my opinion. Jake being a 3, he should always be a 5. So a 3 for Jake is very lackluster. A 3 for Van Hammer would be the best he ever had, in comparison. Next up, we have the Barbarian with Cactus Jack versus Rick Bravo. This was another one of those famous squash matches. Barbarian picks up the win. I give it a 1 out of 5. Again, much like the Van Hammer match, I really had little interest in it. I like Barbarian, don't get me wrong. I think he's a good wrestler. I love Cactus Jack. He's my favorite wrestler, and that's my favorite form of Mick Foley, was Cactus. But it just fell flat. I don't know if it's because it's my 2018 eyes watching squash matches. I've watched other squash matches that I actually enjoyed. This one again just felt like a waste of time. Felt like a waste that they needed to kill 5 minutes of airtime, so they did this. Then we get our main event of the night. And oh my God, was I surprised, because I didn't know what was going to be on this. I didn't look at who was on the card. I just picked at random and hit play. Dustin Rhodes and Barry Windham versus Dr. Death Steve Williams and Terry Bam Bam Gordy, a.k.a. the Miracle Violence Connection, a.k.a. one of the greatest tag teams of all time. They destroyed in New Japan and All Japan, and also destroyed in WCW for a little while. I love Doc and Gordy. That's one of my favorite teams, or one of my guilty pleasures. Not even guilty pleasures. I love watching them, especially their All Japan stuff. My God, are they amazing. This match was by far the best match of the night. You had 4 really great wrestlers. Dustin was coming into his own. He's not quite as good as he would be as Goldust, but even in the natural character, you would see how good of a wrestler he really was. And to be honest, I think he was a better wrestler as Dustin the Natural Rhodes, and a better performer as Goldust, if you know what I mean. In other words, he had better matches as Dustin, but better overall performances as Goldust. More theatrics, more got the psychology down. And what can you say about Barry Windham? Barry Windham's just amazing. This was a really, really good match. I highly recommend going back and watching this to watch this tag team match. If you've never seen Dr. Death Steve Williams and Terry Bam Bam Gordy tag up, go back and watch this definitely. It isn't their best match, but it's a really good match against 2 really good opponents. I really thoroughly enjoyed this. I can't say how much I enjoyed this match. I'm going to give and by the way, it's for the WCW Tag Team Championships, which we see change hands. Dustin and Barry Windham pick up the tag titles. In a surprise, I was shocked to see the tag championships change on Saturday night. I know they did stuff like that every now and then, but I thought by 92 that was kind of only on pay-per-view you would see a change, or Clash of the Champions would you see a change. So I was pleasantly surprised at the title change. Really good match. I really recommend it. Like I said, it's a 5 out of 5 from me. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. Now, going into our ratings, we're going to rate the show as a whole. Our rating system, as you've seen, is a 1 to 5 scale. However, for the ratings of the whole show, we give, a little bit of visual aid. A 5 is a Kane, a 4 is a Goldust, 3 is a Hurricane Helms, 2 is a Dungeon of Doom, and 1 is a Gobbledygooker. I'm going to give the show a 3, give it a Hurricane Helms. The squash matches and the subpar interviews kind of bring it down a bit. The main event itself is a 5. I thought that was amazing. The announce team of JR and Arn Anderson were a highlight. Pillman and Brad Armstrong is a highlight. Seeing the young versions of DDP and Kevin Nash and Shane Douglas was fun to watch. I would actually recommend going back and checking this out for yourself, especially the main event. The main event is worth it in itself. I can't say enough on how much I enjoyed that. But like I said, I'm going to give it a 3, a Hurricane. I thought overall, pretty good show. A couple spots it could have been better. And again, it could be my 2018 eyes looking at a 1992 product. But that's what I'm at now. I mean, we're looking at it from this time, so I got to review it in this time frame. The 2 promos took a little bit away. The squash matches took a little bit away from it. But other than that, I recommend it. I honestly recommend checking this out. It's not going to disappoint you if you do. But basically, that's all I have to say on this topic. My name is George Coles, and this has been an episode of It Came From the Network.